If you'd like to talk about your own Bigfoot encounter, or if you're looking for help from a Bigfoot investigator in your area, email me at bigfootcrossroads@gmail.com.
I'm the Squatch Detective, Steve Kulls, and I've been investigating the Bigfoot mystery since 1998.
Steve Kulls, the Squatch Detective, right here in the hot seat. Look out, he's cocked and loaded, folks.
I sure am.
Did you say 1998?
Yeah, 1998. I have been doing this. First read a book that was strangely written about an area very close to me, and I didn't realize that there was that many sightings that close to me. So that's how it all started for me. I was a professional investigator since 1988, and it was like, wow, I got to check this out because it just piqued my investigative curiosity.
And what did you think? Well, what was your process? Because back then, I got in this around 2000, a couple of years after you did, and there wasn't a whole lot of information out there on the internet like there is today. So how did you kind of approach the subject once you decided to start looking into it?
Well, I started getting into the Yahoo groups, and there was a lot of Yahoo groups about Bigfoot. And I had met through the Yahoo groups people like Eric Altman and Hawk Spearman, and just started talking about it, learning about it, taking the information in the book, which was very descriptive of where things happened, and starting my own little website called the Adirondack Research Organization. And I remember doing this little get-together maybe in 1999 or 2000, and a guy showed up, and he says, "Oh, I'm from Michigan." So it was pretty unusual, but that's the reach. I mean, learned a lot through those groups, and learned a lot by meeting people locally.
And you were in New York at the time?
Yep, absolutely.
And already pulling people all the way from Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, he was like, "Oh, my name is such and such. I'm from Michigan. Do you mind if I join in?" And there was another gentleman that was from Western New York, up by the Rochester area, an older gentleman, and he brought his family with him. Actually, they were in town. They wanted to meet me and talk about their experiences and stuff, and all the local people that I had gathered collectively as a gaggle, which was probably about 5 or 6 people. So we sat there with 10 people at this big buffet just talking Bigfoot, and that was really the first time that it happened. And it was 2003, and I got asked. Somebody picked it up on the local media, so then I got asked to be on a TV show, and that's where I met the author of one of the authors of Monsters of the Northwoods, which is the book I'm speaking about. So I got to befriend him, and next thing you know, I was invited to join the BFRO because I had gotten a sighting report, and I investigated it, and so boom, there I am. And through that, I got contacted by Bill Brand, who was another author of Monster of the Northwoods, and he became my de facto mentor for quite a while. So it just started to steamroll. Then it was a newspaper article the same year about me and my research, and it came to be December 31st, 2005. I sat there and I made sure it was ready to launch for January 1st, 2006, and I launched SquatchDetective.com.
And the rest is history.
And the rest is history.
So you've kind of always been in the limelight a little bit whenever it comes to Bigfoot stuff.
At first locally. I mean, it took a few years, but then all of a sudden it was like, and then it just, 2006, I started SquatchDetective.com. 2008, Monster Quest shows up, and I've been on TV pretty much, on and off since 2008. I mean, my last show I was on was on the trail of Bigfoot, the journey with Small Town Monsters.
Highly successful documentary series.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm actually going to be doing a part in Finding Jay Part 2. So if anybody's seen Finding Jay, that's also on Amazon. But I'm going to be as part of the second installment.
So if the Squatch Detective moniker, you've used it as a handle, it's kind of become your brand. For people who don't know, how would you describe the Squatch Detective? What is the Squatch Detective?
Well, it's kind of funny. The whole moniker started by there used to be a guy years ago, and unfortunately he passed away like within a couple of years of me being in research. And I do not remember his name, but he used to go by the handle of the Squatch Commando. And I was like, that's a pretty cool name. And I happen to be a professional investigator, and in some cases, Squatch investigator doesn't sound too ringy, but Squatch Detective kind of rolls. So when my first website was squatchdetective.freeyellow.com, and that was the Adirondack. It was just simply my Yahoo handle was Squatch Detective when I had my Yahoo Mail account.
Wow.
So that's how it is. But what I've I've reason to stand for is, basically educating people about the mystery, keeping it real, fact-based, not fantasy-based, science, not science fiction, and exposing the charlatans and the hoaxes and the pseudoscience.
Which you've done a better job at than anybody I can think of.
Well, I appreciate that.
I've been thinking about this interview all day. We've known each other for a very long time. It was your show was the first time I was ever on any sort of Bigfoot podcast. You had a guest on there by the name of Eric Beckyard.
Oh, that was like the greatest. That was like I got to say, that was only like the fourth. I mean, I started the radio podcast on September 24th, 2006. That's how long I've been podcasting. And Beckyard, I believe, was in December of 2006.
Wow. I just remember I was listening to the show, and I believe I was actually listening to the show because we kind of had a mutual friend in Indy, Steve.
Yeah, Steve Pickett, yeah.
Yeah, who's also since then passed, unfortunately.
God rest his soul.
So I was checking out your show and everything, and EB, as he went by back then, who is also no longer with us, he was just grinding my gears. Everything he said. And so I called in.
Yep.
And caught the bug of being on the air and arguing with people. Yep.
Well, the funny thing is I wish people could see me behind the scenes, because I spent half the night on the floor, not on my chair, because I was laughing so much, and people were getting angry with him, and I just thought it was hysterical.
Oh, he was so good at getting under people's skin.
He was
very entertaining. And,
with the exception of the second time he came on the podcast, which was about 6 weeks later, and Sean Forker got under his skin and made him hang up.
Yeah. I remember that. That was a huge deal back then.
Yeah, nobody ever could get Eric to shut up.
I mean,
but Sean did.
Eric, the internet community back then was still small enough that if you were new to it, and you started posting on message boards and stuff, he would email you directly and try to get to you before anybody else did. I had an email from him. And I remember if you crossed him, if you angered him for some reason, he would do everything he could to ruin your life on the internet.
He was the first Bigfoot internet troll.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it was maybe you can help me out here, but to my recollection at the time, he was like he was like the only one. There wasn't like a bunch of people talking about paranormal stuff and arguing against flesh and blood people and just being disruptive like there is today.
Oh, it's horrible today, but yeah, you're absolutely right. He was the ultimate Bigfoot bad boy, but he was good. He would do a lot of stuff that I was doing, and that's, going after hoaxers. He would go after people, and he would dig and try to find out every bad thing about him or every piece of dirt he could, and he would broadcast that live.
I mean, at the end of the day, what are your thoughts on him now that he's gone? I mean, do you think he was just completely full of it? Do you think he believed the stuff he was saying?
I'd like to think that, when he first got into this, he was a very much flesh and blood guy.
Right.
But I think he had a lot of confirmation bias. He was overly smart. He was a Mensa member. He was a genius.
Yeah.
But sometimes people who are that smart sometimes are very socially awkward. He had I think a master's degree from Berkeley. But I think what happens is that sometimes when you get a person so smart that in their arrogance of being that so smart and it's not per se, I'm not saying he was arrogant, although he was arrogant. If you look at his personality type being arrogant, being at first a flesh and blood person, I can understand that. Well, if I can't find them and I can't photograph them, they must be something else.
Uh-huh. And
they fall into that mindset.
Do you think that trap happens to a lot of people?
To some, yes. Absolutely. The people that go to the woo side of things, or the supernatural Bigfoot, it's because they have this, how should I say it? Not necessarily arrogance, but maybe an ego to it, that they feel that, hey, we're the most intelligent people in the world. And if we can't find Bigfoot, then there's got to be a reason why. They got to be smarter than us, or they got to be, supernatural, and that's why we have, so many people trying to say they're a people. They're just like us, except they look different. They're very intelligent. Or they go to they're supernatural. They're interdimensional. They're aliens. They're every type of excuse to make reason why we can't find them. And the simple fact is we can't find them because, number one, we're not looking for a deer. We're not looking for a bear. We're not looking for a cat in the woods. We're looking for a primate, and primates are pretty smart. And that's the reason why we don't find them easily.
I would like to bring up something at this point for the sake of the listeners. With what you just said, you are also a paranormal investigator.
Absolutely, yes.
And have had experiences.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that I've always liked about your approach whenever it comes to hoaxers and things of that nature, Squatch Detective is a perfect moniker for you because you handle it from like a forensics aspect, from an investigative aspect, and not
clinical.
Science.
Yes, very clinical.
And whenever you always outline your entire investigation and everything that you do, and it always comes across as you are simply looking for the truth.
Right. Exactly. It's what we should all be doing. In fact, one of my 5 tenets that my organization runs by is tenet number 3 is always tell the truth. Just because this is not a Bigfoot does not mean, basically Bigfoot does not exist. It means that this particular case is not a Bigfoot.
Have you had your own sighting or encounter?
Yes, I've had a couple.
Would you like to share those?
Sure. So it would be fall of 2011. I believe this was in October of 2011, if my memory serves me right, because it's now more than 10 years, and I am now over 50, so the mind isn't as crisp as it was at 40. But in October of 2011, we were holding an expedition with the old field team before I put the new field team in, and there was probably about a dozen of us there at that night, and we had been out for several hours and doing our thing. We broke up into like 3 groups, and we spread out in what I call my research area A section, which is in the Adirondack State Park. And people were getting, some movements here and there. And it got to the point, it was probably like 9 or 10 o'clock, and we had been beating the brush at least since 7 o'clock in the evening. And of course, it's October, so it gets dark pretty fast. So we can, you can get out there at 6 o'clock. It's pitch black. We're all sitting by the fire now. We're doing our meal break. So people are cooking, people are getting their coffee, people are drinking their beverages, and we're all sitting there basically debriefing about the first part of the night. And, talking started coming down a bit. So I said, I got to get batteries for my headlamp. It's getting kind of dim. So I go out to the vehicle, which is parked alongside this dirt road. And I go and get my battery, stick in my pocket, and I light up a cigarette. And I look downhill, which is the north side, which is to the north. And it's actually, at that point in time, historically, is where more of the evidence was going on. And I spin around and I shine my light to the south, which is an uphill grade. And there's one standing there right next to the utility pole that's on the side of the road. And it kind of looked at me, and I could see the eyes reflecting back at me, and the eyes were blinking. And the first thing it did after it did that, it kind of turned and looked behind it real quick and put its gaze back on my light. Now I froze because, at that point, I don't want to make any movement. I want to try to keep this as long as I can. And I stood locked there, and, I don't know, I wasn't timing it. But, it was probably a good 30, 40 seconds, and I could see the outline of its head and the shoulders, and it wasn't a robust Sasquatch like Patty, but, of the Patterson-Gimlin film, but it was lanky, but it was very tall and very long, and you could see it had like shaggy long hair. And after a bit of time, I shook my light, and it turned, and it walked into the woodline. Now, the interesting thing is, as I got thinking about this, what was it doing there? Well, very simple. We were all around the campfire. Everybody was being rather noisy. And I just kind of quietly walked out to my car. I don't think it noticed me. Because I didn't walk out with any lights on. I was completely in the black until I popped my light on and wanted to look up and down. Now, I'm sure it heard me when I got into my car, but it probably figured that I wasn't looking at it. I didn't see it at that point in time. But it was there, and I think what it was doing was observing our campfire, because all the leaves have dropped at that point in time. So you can stand at the road and see the campfire from the road, and all the people and the noise and the laughing and the chortling that, me, I get a wicked sense of humor. So my team has a wicked sense of humor. So we're all having a good time. And we enjoy each other's company. So it kind of all, made this like big campfire type of atmosphere for it to, hey, I'm gonna go in there and see what's going on.
Random chance occurrence.
Exactly. Nothing spectacular. Just there it was, and then I shook the light and I walked off. So I immediately called Team A, which was one of my op teams, and the one gentleman's name is Steve as well. And funny thing is Steve and I both have the same birthday too, which is hysterical. He's a year older than me, but we have the same birthday, and we both have last names that begin with K. So you can't say Steve K, and you can't say Steve K born on January 27th, because we'll be like, oh, what? That's us. So it's kind of funny. But he had he was a Marine and an MOS as a sniper, and was in the first Gulf War. And he came out, and I had a videographer with him, and they kind of started mousing around, and Mike got the camera on me and, asked me what I saw, and he's got me minutes after the encounter actually recording me saying what I saw, which was awesome.
Yeah.
And then, the video cuts to we were trying to gather the height, and we figured it was about 8 foot tall. And then as Mike and Steve, and I stayed put, and now I'm starting to coordinate, okay, B team, come on out here. I'm going to send you down the road a bit. And, while I'm instructing team B where to go, Mike is videotaping, and I didn't know this was going on, that he actually caught the video of this. But Steve found a track, or a scuff, I should say, where it had stepped into the wood line. And you could still see dirt falling into it. And the videographer caught it, and the videographer was kind of a skeptic. And he's like, that looks fresh. And, you can hear him go, yeah, there's still dirt falling in.
And this was at the same spot where you had seen it.
This is going on minutes afterwards.
Yeah.
And then you hear a radio call in, and it's your base camp to Steve. Yeah, we got a lot of movement going on here to the southwest of the camp. And that's exactly the direction it walked off into. So I was like, oh, wow.
So you have several things corroborating.
Yeah. It was just, now the second time was about a year later. I'm going to say that this was late September. And it was 2012. And, I was with Jeff Thomas and Wayne Larson and Melissa Larson, Holly Larson. And we were up in the same area, and we were shooting for Nat Geo. And Nat Geo, we had told Nat Geo on day one that, listen, we got a long drive because we were coming for Chautauqua Lake, which is at the other end of the state. So it's a 5-hour drive just to where I live, and then another couple hours at that time to up there. So we were on the road basically after stops for 8 hours, and then we had to get wood, and it was raining like a banshee that day. So all the wood we were collecting was wet. So we were collecting a lot of birch, because birch bark has a lot of oils in it. So even if it's wet, once those oils get superheated inside of them, it goes up like a petroleum based, piece of wood. So we get there. Nat Geo shows up. They do some initial interviews. We're like, yeah, okay. We're not going to bother you tonight. We'll let you guys rest. Okay. They take off. So it's still daylight. We set up camp. We eat dinner. Now we're talking around the campfire, and the rain had subsided probably by, I want to say, mid-evening. So it wasn't pouring rain out anymore. But it was, a little bit of wind, and all of a sudden, it dumped some raindrops off the tree leaf, or whatever leaves were remaining. So at night, Melissa was the first one to bed. Then Wayne goes to bed, and then Wayne and I stay up late last. Jeff goes to bed, but Jeff went out to his Jeep to get his pillow and blanket because it had been raining out. He didn't want to leave his pillow and blanket in the tent. It was a new tent. He said, in case it's got a leak, I'm going to leave my pillow and blanket in my Jeep in case, until the last minute. So about 11 o'clock or so, he goes out to his Jeep, grabs his pillow and blanket out of his Jeep, goes back into his tent. He goes, and probably within a half hour, we could hear a little bit of snoring from there. So Wayne and I were up a little bit, and then we decide, okay, time for bed. So I'm sleeping for maybe an hour or so, hour and a half, and nature calls. So I got to use a tree. So I unzip my tent, and it's still overcast, but there is a full moon that night. And so the clouds were kind of lit very, like that dim. So it was like a night light almost. And it was fall. So some of them, a lot of the leaves had fallen, but there were still some leaves in the trees. But you could still see like a little bit out to the road. And between the road and where my tent was in the camp, there is this 5.5 foot one. And I could see it was brownish red, long hair. And as soon as I unzipped the tent, it took off like a bat out of hell. Whoop, and it ran. And my first reaction was, no way. No, it couldn't be. I rubbed my eyes. I'm like, what the hell? No, I couldn't have seen that. So I used a tree and go back to my tent. I'm like, wow, okay. I'm just gonna. No, I couldn't have seen that. So I wake up a couple hours later. And I unzip the tent. This time I have a flashlight with me, and I don't see nothing. So that ends the story there. But the next morning I get up. Actually, I was sleeping still, and I'm awoken by Jeff. Steve, you got to see this. And I get up out of the tent, and I'm like, what's the matter? Come here. You got to see this. You too, Wayne. Come here. Look at this. Behind his Jeep, something left a birch log. And he's like, he couldn't have opened the back of his Jeep to get his pillow and blanket with that birch log being there. He would have tripped over it. So that was kind of weird. Mm-hmm. Something left a birch log, after he went to bed. Later on in the day, actually it was the next day, Wayne and Melissa find a 9-inch track with toes perpendicular to the trail leading out to the vehicles, which was in the opposite direction I saw my guy running. So we found the track. And then the last day, like a couple of days later, Jeff had an experience. He went hiking by himself, and off in the brush, something was growling at it. And he's not sure what it was, but he goes, it did not sound canine at all. It was kind of more of a gruffy type of growl, rather than like a canine growl. And he beat feet out. He goes, okay, I get the message, and he came back. So yeah, it was a lot of high strangeness when we were there, obviously.
Another situation where various puzzle pieces fitting together.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, the most, between to me, not so much the growling incident. I wasn't there, and I know growling can be misinterpreted by so many different things, but I think the strongest thing there was the track and the fact that something had left a birch log, right. And we actually found where the birch log came from. It actually came out of a little bog across on the other side of the road, because we could see it freshly plucked out of there, but we didn't go in to get it because you would have to get your feet very wet to get that particular log, which is really bizarre. I just can't explain it.
Now, to me, these stories are extremely interesting. They're not grand. They're not, I spoke to one, or one came in my house, or
I got a phone call from one.
Right. You said it, not me. And this is, neither one of these things happened until you were already doing this for over a decade.
Yeah, well, it was 2011. Yeah, I've been at it. I mean, I've had some equipment, what I believed were equipment sightings, but once you see it with your raw naked eye, that kind of changes your whole, what really is a sighting. And even the first time I had an equipment sighting, I had been doing this for 8 years. So
with an investigative background.
Right.
And I would imagine you mentioned one of your team members earlier was like a Marine sniper. I was going to say, I imagine that your team members are pretty vetted.
Yeah, most of my team members now, not so much back then, but I would probably say about 75% of my team members are either active law enforcement or former law enforcement. So we have a very, and some of them have military backgrounds, as well as law enforcement backgrounds. So, I have a guy in the team who's a psychology major. I have a couple of people on teams that are long-term. Not only is one a corrections officer, but him and his father-in-law are, long-term hunters as well. So they know how to track and all that stuff. A lot more field experience tracking the known animals than I do. But, I'm learned on the stuff, but I don't get to actually do it all that often unless I'm out in the field investigating. Whereas they go out and hunt, for weeks on end, every day. Got to get up at 5, got to get out there in the tree stand and whatnot.
So have any of these people or anybody who you completely trust ever confided into you a story about a paranormal experience involving these creatures?
No, not a paranormal experience or a supernatural experience. And the funny thing is that I'm very good friends and a team member with Jack Kenna, and he's one of the regulars on Haunted Case Files. And him and I had a long discussion. He was on my podcast, and he admitted to me as a 18-year-old boy, and he didn't want to call it a Bigfoot. And but what he described was a Bigfoot he'd seen while he was fishing, and all of a sudden he was going to get into the pond, and he was getting ready to set his stuff up, and there was this thing. It stood up, kind of looked over at him, and walked into the brush. And what he didn't, and I was like, well, and he told me where it was. It was on the Kinderhook Creek, and I go, it happened to be in the 80s. He's like, yeah. I go, have you ever heard of the Kinderhook creature? What? Yeah, there's something called the Kinderhook creature. It was in the 80s in that area at that time.
Wow.
And he's like, no. And then it took him another week, but he finally admitted, he goes, I've been trying to tell myself that, no, I didn't see a Bigfoot, but I got to admit, that's probably what I saw now. So, but, again, same thing. There was nothing, supernatural about it. Mm-hmm. It was just another animal in the woods to him.
Where I'm at this point with everything, another fellow researcher said something to me whenever I was talking about why don't paranormal people ever try to come on my show or, tell their stories or anything. And some things were said. I got kind of mad, but it made me think. And I've had a handful of paranormal experiences in my life, things that I can't explain. I was into the paranormal before I was into Bigfoot. I never experienced anything paranormal in the field that I would attribute to Bigfoot activity. It's just something I've never experienced. However, I have experienced paranormal stuff, and I have no explanation for those things. So I've decided to have more of an open mind, or be open to hearing people's stories about their paranormal experiences.
Sure.
Because maybe they did experience something that I just never did. I don't know.
Well, there's a lot of different, there is, to me, when somebody has a quote unquote, supernatural experience with the Bigfoot, there's one, usually I pick it as one of, several things. The first being is that their mind is so caught up in trying to figure out what's in front of them that there's like a stutter. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden it's gone. The Bigfoot just disappeared. Well, no, your mind was trying to interpret what it was looking like because it's not in your belief system, and now it's gone. Number two is post-traumatic stress.
Right.
Regression. Post-traumatic, like that's why children, have a traumatic experience. They forget it. That's why you're driving a car and you get hit head on. You have this traumatic experience. You don't remember it. It's because the brain protects you from that pain and that particular incident. And that's just the brain's natural defense.
Right.
The other thing is perhaps they're having an actual paranormal experience and it's just manifesting as a Sasquatch.
What do you mean?
Well, there are many different types of spirits, I would suppose. Mm-hmm. Some would call them demonic. Some would call them elementals. Some would call them, just non-human entities. And what happens is you're seeing it with the intention of seeing a Bigfoot, so it's going to manifest itself as a Bigfoot to fool you.
Okay.
And that's a potential. And as crazy as that sounds, I have dealt with, people that have seen, children that turn out to be a demonic haunting, or have seen, partial images of even their relatives that turns out to be a demonic haunting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a way of tricking your mind into something that you're expecting to see, not or something you may be sympathetic to. Because as a Bigfoot researcher, we're generally sympathetic towards the creatures.
Right.
So given that, I think those are some of that. And the fourth in it is usually the one that's the least, but it can be applicable as you're just nuts and you didn't see anything. You just thought you saw a Bigfoot and thought you saw an orb after it.
Mm-hmm.
So those are your four possibilities right there. Because if Bigfoot was truly paranormal, why would we have so many reports of just normal activity, animal activity? Why would they leave tracks? Why do we hear them howl? Why do we hear them tree knock? Why would there be such the foul stench if they were supernatural? And I have encountered the stench before, back in 2006, before I found the Fordham cast. We actually heard that sucker walking around us. And then we go back and we find the track just off the trail where it kind of intersected the trail. But that's neither here nor there. I'm going to get back on track. Is that why I've never heard of somebody ever seeing a paranormal or a supernatural Bigfoot where it left a track or had a stench or any of that. So what that's telling me is they're looking at something completely different.
Paranormal things, correct me if I'm wrong here, but paranormal events, classic hauntings and things like that, tend to follow certain patterns. Your classic type of haunting will. You have your intelligent hauntings where they tend to interact with people. Right.
And then you have your classic type of hauntings, or your residual hauntings. That's the word I'm looking for. And a residual haunting is something that just replays itself over and over again. And the fact is that where I lived as a child growing up, we had a residual haunting. Mm-hmm. And every once in a while, we would see this woman walking through the house or a woman appearing and disappearing, but it would never interact with us. It was like we weren't there. And my father was actually the first to see it. And I remember my mother, "Oh, Bill, you're crazy. What the hell are you talking about?" And then like a year later, she had a sighting of it. And I said, "My parents are crazy. My parents are crazy." And then at probably age 15, I had my first sighting where I seen a woman walking to our front room, and I thought it was my mom. I go, "Mom?" And then she calls me, and she's behind me. So, yeah.
I'm crazy.
Yeah, no, I'm crazy. But yeah, I mean, so is what they're seeing a residual haunting or an intelligent haunting? I tend to believe it's more going to be, if it's manifesting and then just disappears. I would think in the woods. Think about the history of the grounds where people go. These are Native American lands. Native Americans roamed these forests years before we even, 1,000 years before we were even here as, the Europeans came. You look at all of that, and it means a lot. That's the reason why these things could be happening. Things you could also look at is, where are your ley lines? Where are your deposits of like quartz? And other stones that can conduct and retain energy. And those are some of the types of things that I would think of looking at if somebody had a supernatural Bigfoot encounter.
Not saying that it's impossible or that the person is lying all of the time, just that there are some other areas of research and some things that we do know that are possible explanations for what they experienced.
And I forgot one too, and that's infrasound. If a Sasquatch uses infrasound, that can cause the eyes to vibrate, cause hallucinations, can cause the ears to vibrate, make them, think they're hearing things. It can cause feelings of being watched. It can cause unease, and it can cause ear fluttering. We know that. So.
Which was actually the reason I originally called into your show that night was infrasound was being discussed. Yes, all those years ago, we were already talking about it.
Yep.
And EB was against it. I believe you were using it as a possible explanation for things.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
He was saying that there's no large mammals that produce infrasound, and I called in and I was like, tigers, just off
elephants,
elephants,
blue whales. But here's the interesting thing about that too, Matt, is when I wrote my second book, What Would Sasquatch Do? Well, I was doing research about infrasound for that, because when I tend to write, I tend to really double check my work and start digging even deeper. And, I want to write a chapter on infrasound. And then I start looking into it. And then you realize that, wait a minute, I noticed something. That almost every large mammal of its class has the ability the largest mammal of each class has the ability to use infrasound.
Really?
The biggest whales, blue whales, use infrasound.
Mm-hmm.
Our good friends, the pachyderms, the elephants, they actually have more other animals that belong in their class, but they're the biggest. And guess what? They use infrasound. Tigers, the biggest cat, uses infrasound. There's speculation that wolves may use infrasound.
That's interesting.
And they're the biggest dog. They're the biggest canine. So does it make sense that you have like 5 or 6 different mammals and all the biggest ones of them use infrasound? Wouldn't it make sense if a Sasquatch existed, it would be the biggest primate? So therefore, it's very well possible that it could use infrasound.
That's interesting.
Because a primate is a mammal. That was some of the information I had found on that, which I found fascinating.
Yeah, that is. I wasn't aware that that fact about mammals and animals out there, that the largest ones all could do it.
And most people won't. It's not something that science broadcasts. It just happened to be a correlation I found while looking into different creatures that use infrasound. Like, why is this every different class? Like a beluga whale does not use infrasound, but a blue whale does. So it's fascinating stuff to realize that, I made this correlation here that nobody's ever seen before. Here's some more justification. And of course, I've talked to Dr. Meldrum about, do you think, I asked him a question, do you think they, and Meldrum was like, yeah, I absolutely think about how thick their vocal cords are. Look at their neck structure. Why wouldn't they be able to use infrasound having, thick vocal cords like that? So I feel it's very much a possibility, and not far out science like bioluminescence or, hair follicles that can make you cloak or any of that stuff.
Right. What made you decide, you know what? I'm going to go after hoaxers. Because there's a lot of hoaxers have existed in the Bigfoot world. And there's only a handful of people that take the time to find any evidence against them and point them out or any of that stuff. So why did you choose to do it?
Well, that was because when I first started SquatchDetective.com, its concept was to be an investigative news agency, basically, covering this topic. And the key word is investigative. And if you're presented a case, you're going to have one of several outcomes. So when you have these big profile cases come along, I'm not going to take a look at it. I'm not going to, analyze it. So it was just a natural to me. See, I'm not a scientist. And see, there's 2 types of researchers. One is that believe they're scientists. And unfortunately, that's not going to help the cause. They got to understand as a scientist, if they think they're going to prove Bigfoot exists, they're not. A scientist only can prove a Bigfoot exists because that's science. We can bring the evidence to the scientists. Yes, that's what we can do. And that's the mode we have to think in. And I look at every type of incident like a crime scene. If you're going to collect evidence, you have to, coordinate. You have to do it the way you need to do it, but in a forensic manner, in like a crime scene. If I'm going to investigate a sighting report, I'm going to get so detailed because if it passes the smell test of the investigation, you're going to be able to answer all the questions about this particular sighting. Well, where are they coming from? Well, they were coming from so-and-so. Well, how long were they driving until they saw their roadside crossing? Oh, it was about 20 minutes, 22 minutes. And it was this amount of miles. And the reason why is because I trace it. I backtrack it. I work the timeline. And what that does is if somebody's BSing you, it's not going to work. But if somebody is telling you the truth, you're building their credibility. You're building that sighting report's credibility or that piece of evidence credibility. What type of equipment did they use? What type of recorder did they use? What were they driving? Who was with them in the car? Did they know, where did they stop off between point A to point B? What time did they get home that night? And then there's something else that I use that a lot of people don't, is the corroborative witness. One of the things I use is the corroborative witness. Say you have the lone passenger sees the creature skip across the road. He sees it. He's telling you the story. Then I start getting into, well, when you got home, did you tell anybody? Well, yeah, I told my wife. She thought I was crazy, but, I told her what I saw. Would you mind if I talked to her? Because the first thing, or I talk to the neighbor, or would you mind if I talk to them? Because the bottom line is this, like years ago, I was with Bill Brandon. We interviewed a woman by the name of Sue. She was on Monster Quest, actually, my episode. But this happened, like a few years before we even did the Monster Quest. But we interviewed her about the sighting she had when she was a little girl. And she was only about 7 or 8 at the time, I believe. And she ran home and told her mother. So we interviewed the mother because there is some corroboration now. Well, yeah, he said, sorry, she came home. She was all upset. Well, the same thing is that you want to get, how was this person when they came home? Because that builds their credibility. Mm-hmm. Because now I've corroborated that something has occurred. Now, the wife could be lying too, but like I said, some of my background is I'm a trained forensic interviewer. So that was part of my education and becoming as I was an investigator. So I can detect a lot of that. Sometimes if something doesn't pass the sniff test, I'm usually one real quick to raise the flag. Now, the funny thing is, if I don't believe a case happens, I generally just walk away from it. Okay, thank you very much for your time. And I go, and that's it, I'm done. Wash my hands. But if you see me start doing field work afterwards in a particular area, after I interview a couple witnesses, guess what? I'm thinking that their story is real and it's passing the sniff test.
So let me ask you this. I know that a lot of investigative techniques discerning if someone's lying or not are based on the questions that you ask and the responses that they give. Is all the stuff about, facial tics and things like that, is all that true as well?
Oh, absolutely. It's also a lot of body language and body language interpretation. And, part of that is not only I did take interview and interrogation, but I also took neurolinguistics, which is partly facial tics and stuff like that. There's a YouTube channel out there run by 4 guys that are really super smart. One's an Army intelligence officer. There's a couple of PhDs that belong to this group. And I actually took their body language behavior course to really refine myself. But yeah, there's a lot to it. And it's almost like a lie detector. You kind of talk to a person for a while, build their baseline, and then you start getting into, questioning of what they saw and how they're reacting and how they're, one thing I never knew is a lot of people thought the eyes was everything. And it's not, because, there's different types of people, how they absorb information. But the real area look for is the billboard to the soul, which is the forehead. Because when a person is really under stress and they're talking, all that information you're going to see on their forehead and their brow ridge all the time. When they're under stress, those brows start to furrow real fast. When they're asked a question they don't like, between their eyebrows will scrunch up to a little ball. When one of the biggest signs of somebody getting ready to tell you a big lie is the hidden lips, where they, pucker in their lips before they speak. And these are just the other things too, is like when they tell you something, they raise their eyebrows up and they keep them up. And that's something, if you think about, I'll give you a good example. You have one child at home. You come home and the cookie jar is broken. And you look at the little child and you say, did you break the cookie jar? And they raise their eyebrows way up high and say, I didn't break the cookie jar. That is exactly the type of things you look for. Now, you call them facial tics. We call them micro expressions because sometimes they happen rapidly fast. Uh-huh. But that's why you build up a baseline and you start talking to a person. Now, the interesting thing is that you combine that with some of the linguistics of what people say and objections. And then you have the infamous, well, I would never hoax this. And that is usually when you're thinking, they're hoaxing. That's, excuse me, they're hoaxing. Because, they're trying to, you don't know how many people, excuse me, you don't know how many people I've caught in my lifetime, employees that I've caught stealing, that when I talk to them about theft in a store, before they steal, they turn around and tell me, I would never do this. My so-and-so is a cop, or my so-and-so was in law enforcement for years. And then like 3 weeks later, I'm catching them. It's usually the big red flag is when they say, I would never lie. I wouldn't lie to you. Why would I lie to you? As God is my witness. God's honest truth. I swear on my children's children. All of that stuff. Those are big flags that they're really trying to convince you they're telling the truth. Why? Because if truth is on their side, they shouldn't really have to push you to convince you they're telling the truth. And that's the psychology of the guilty mind. Somebody, people have tried to, I would never fall for that. Try me. Well, I can't try you because you don't have the psychology of somebody that did something wrong because you didn't do anything wrong. But once you do that, once you set that wheel in motion, it sets off psychological responses in your brain. Like telling a story. Yep.
So what kind of person is a hoaxer? What kind of person does it take?
Well, it takes several kinds. And then this is what I found over my years of doing this. And by no means am I a qualified psychoanalyst, but I have done my fair share of forensic psychology work and a lot of studies on criminal profiling. And people go, well, this is not a crime, but there are a lot of similarities to hoaxing and crimes. Like crimes are not honest ventures. Neither is hoaxing. One is a violation of the penal law. The other one isn't. But the psychology behind them is all the same because it's a dishonesty. So when you look at the types of hoaxers, they generally come in a few different ways. First, you have the pranksters. We're going to get a laugh. Or maybe we're going to get a few YouTube hits and go viral and have fun. Right? Then you have
the dog trainer guy.
The dog trainer guy. And it's so over the top. But we used to have people that used to do Bigfoot pranks too, that were jokes. But that's the reason why they did. They just want to say, hey, I just want to see how far it could go. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't really engage anybody, right? They would just, okay, here's the video, done. But then when you confront them, they'd be really quick to say, we were just trying to pass off a joke, right? And they would go away. They would never do it again. By far the biggest group is the people that want to belong. They have a psychological deficiency somewhere or some weakness where I just want to belong and feel special and feel up on top of everybody else. So I'm going to come up with it. I communicate with Sasquatch every week, every day of the week. And what ends up happening is they start hoaxing. We saw that, we heard that. We're talking, we left food out in the gifting bowl and all this other nonsense. And what ends up happening is the reason why is they're trying to just build up their own low self-esteem is what they're doing. right? And so that's the psychologically needy hoaxer is probably the biggest group. And then finally, you have what I call the profiteers. And those are the ones that are trying to get fame and fortune and trying all kinds of hoodwinks. And those guys won't ever back down. They usually have very narcissistic tendencies, some even sociopathic tendencies. And that's what you deal with there. So those are the real, my three big ones of why people hoax.
Are there certain ones, I mean, do you concentrate on the latter? Do you go after the ones just looking to fit in and be a part of something? Like, do you have certain qualifiers before you start investigating someone?
I don't investigate people. I investigate evidence. Somebody puts a video out. I look at it. Now we come to the reason why. Penn and Teller was a great example. Remember the Sonoma video?
I do.
Right. So I was the first one, and I remember Squatch. I was so proud. SquatchDetective.com was only 4 weeks old, and we put out a report on that. And the report said, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, but this was put out. This is a hoax put out to embarrass a particular Bigfoot researcher or the community in general. And as it turned out, it's exactly what it was. And how I proved it was a hoax, and I really proved it was through forensic analysis of the digital images on their website. That their pictures didn't match the timeline that they had stated on the website. Because not only did they spout the story, the story wasn't really verbally told; it was put up on a website, and here's the video, right? So usually, when you have, it's become easier because a lot of people just put videos out. They put no story out. A video is only as good as the story behind it. And when you do have a story behind it, now you have stuff you can research. So that makes it a lot easier sometimes to prove it's a hoax. In this case, it was forensic evidence that really digital forensic evidence, because I was not in communication with them, and nor was he in communication with anybody else, because Mark Nelson never existed. It was actually Penn and Teller, and it was the production team doing the show, bullshit, and they did a segment called Craptozoology. So that is, exactly what they were doing. So you go after it case by case. I'll give you another great example, the Bigfoot Peeper. Here's this guy has this nice story and puts out like 4 or 5 of these pictures. And then you read the story, and the story is, and the problem with people is they don't look at the story now. They look at the pictures. People are fly by night. They're, oh, look at that. Oh my God, he's got a Bigfoot on the camera. Look at this video. Wait, has anybody read the story? Because this is how the story reads. I'm sitting there watching television when all of a sudden, when I open my window, I notice a Bigfoot looking in. So I grab the video camera, which conveniently I have next to my little end table next to my chair, and I start video recording it. Now, I'm sorry, but there won't be any video because the video was destroyed in a fire at my mom's house. Right, and this is the story. Then after about 8 minutes, my wife comes in, and she screams and calls the sheriff's department. So then I put my video camera down and I get my gun. End of story. Okay, what's wrong with all those points? Number one, something's in the window, and conveniently you have a camcorder next to your chair. Okay, that's problem number one. Problem number two is your wife runs in. Well, hold on. Your wife was there? You didn't say, hey, honey, don't go outside. There's something outside. There's a Bigfoot outside. Look at this. You don't say that? So you have that. That's number 2 issue. Number 3 issue, wife screams, runs out, calls the sheriff's department. Never tells us which sheriff's department. Right? But then he puts his camera down and grabs his gun now after 8 minutes. Why are you grabbing your gun now after 8 minutes? Makes no sense. Why would you feel comfortable for 8 minutes videotaping something and then all of a sudden you're feeling the need to pick up your gun? So that is the story itself was enough to debunk it. But I do what I do. I go through I try to look at this guy who put it out. He was using his middle name as his first name. And I found his first name, and it turns out that he was a convicted child molester. And he never owned property where he said he owned property. He lives in the middle of a very, on the outskirts of a city, a very, very urban or borderline urban area. At best, it's, suburban. And, there's little light anomalies in the back of the pictures. And his home is behind, it has an open yard to the next yard. And the houses behind him have French doors. So what you're looking at is the lighting in the rooms behind the French doors of the apartments across the way. So, and, we've proven where he lived. We proved that he wasn't who he said he was. As a felon, he's not allowed to own a gun in Colorado. So that makes no sense either. So you have all these things that just completely break down the story. So there's two.
Why do people fall for it? What I guess that would be my other question is not only what kind of person does something like this, but what kind of person falls for these sort of things. I mean, take anyone, God bless him, Rick Dyer. Let's ignore 2008 for a second.
Sure.
Let's look at, I shot one behind a Home Depot in San Antonio. Here's my big ass fake Bigfoot body. Why did people believe that?
Well, remember the group Facebook Find Bigfoot?
Uh-huh.
They were validating everything, including stuff that I had gotten admissions from the people who took as hoaxes. And I would, hey guys, you might want to reevaluate this one. I have an email here from the guy telling him it was him and his brother playing a joke. Everything was a Bigfoot to them. So what you got to do is you got to look at, as far as people, they have such confirmation bias, or they're just plain naive, or they're just want the entertainment value.
And I don't mean to belittle anyone, because I'm even friends with some of the people that,
sure,
gave Rick money and
sure, absolutely. And there was a lot of fine people. And, I guess we're better off asking them. Because you know what? These are questions that have only come out recently. Well, why do people follow them? And maybe that's my next journey, is to find the psychology behind or the behavior behind people that follow people like that. And why did you believe them? And, that may be I wish Frank Cali was still alive, because he would have came on the show and probably been 1,000% honest and told me why. But that is a great, great question, is why. And I've never really looked at the psychology of the believer. I always figured a lot of times, and of course, maybe it's just a social media element we're in, because you pulled a hoax, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and you got outed. Everybody was against you when you got outed.
Right.
Now you have people that still will defend them, even though here's the evidence looking you right in the face. And then you have to wonder, are those people narcissistic or egocentric or naive or, or just a fanboy or a fangirl of the person?
Well,
don't know.
That's interesting. You've put a lot of legwork into exposing Todd Standing.
Right.
I know personally on my blog that I used to have, I no longer have it, but I posted several articles written by some people. Phil Poling, Para Breakdown, did an investigative article about Todd Standing. He's a former police officer from Washington. Daniel Falconer, who is a special effects artist for Wetaworks in New Zealand, who did like Lord of the Rings and King Kong and all kinds of things. Doug Hudson, I believe his name is, from the Pacific Northwest, who's also a special effects guy. Makes Bigfoot masks and statues and stuff. All three of these guys went on record putting their own professional reputations on the line, explaining why the images that Todd Stain produced of the, Bigfoot photographs that he's famous for, were fake, and how they were fake and how they were made and everything else.
Well, they used a CGI, right? That was some of their conclusions, or a morph?
No. The Phil Poling did the morph thing, to try and show that if nothing else, it was most likely that one of the props used were modeled after Standing's face, if it wasn't Standing in a mask himself. But even after these things were produced, even after these gentlemen went on the record with all this stuff, and you have all these people like yourself.
Well, you remember the article I did about the very same picture?
Yeah.
And that proved that it was a layered picture.
Right.
It failed the ELA test, that it was taken with the camera. It was a photograph originally, because originally it came out as a photograph.
Right.
And a lot of people forget that. And then all of a sudden, like a year later, here comes now the photograph is moving. And I was like, time out. Wait, whoa. So I get the picture from the Calgary Sun, and I do a forensic analysis on it. And the camera settings were for basically an indoor studio type setting. And I've talked to several photographic experts who have dealt a lot with cameras, particularly Matt Larson from Central Bigfoot, Florida Bigfoot. Those are all, indoor type settings. You're looking low light conditions, or you're looking for bright light conditions, and a delayed shutter speed, which would make it blurry if it moved, but you get a crisper picture. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the picture itself, it's not right. There are several layers of focus, and you just don't shoot a camera with several layers of focus. It's focused on one thing. So I knew automatically looking at there's something wonky about it.
And now Todd is selling autographed photos, these images. He's selling them. He's profiting off of them. And still to this day, with all that stuff that has been presented against him, every time I see it posted somewhere on the internet, you still have a strong crowd that comes in and says, it's never been proven a hoax.
Oh, yes, it has. Yes, it has. It has. And those are, like you have everywhere else, you have truth deniers. Well, prove it to me where it's real. Can you explain why I failed the ELS test? Explain it to me. Well, those things aren't accurate. No. Explain it to me how it's not accurate. Well, they did. So, the Stanlings, as I like calling them, number one, a lot of them are supported by Todd's sock accounts. But I always show him the first picture he came out, the one that looked like the Muppet, as we call it, the one that looks like it's wearing the parka.
Right.
And I always put that picture up there. So you're telling me this is a Bigfoot too? And they won't answer that. So you can ask me anything you want, but before you say another word, answer this question. Is this a Bigfoot? And they won't answer. No. I asked you the question. When you ask this question, then I'll respond to your question. But answer me this question. Is this a Bigfoot? And that's how I lead off with them now. Because there's no way in hell that looks like a Bigfoot. It doesn't even look like anything that's living. Now, the second picture we have taken down and nailed it apart by the polling falconer document and by the ELA analysis that I done and the metadata analysis that I done. Pretty much we can put that in the hoax category. And then finally, we have this other picture that he came up with. It's just the bridge of the nose up, mostly a forehead shot. And this is things people don't know. But we have a very good inside source now of how Todd was doing things. And I had learned that the person in that picture was his father. And sure enough, the moles on the corners of the eyes line up with the figure, and the hairline matches up with the figure in that picture to his father. Why is that? You ever seen a Bigfoot with widow's peaks?
Wow.
You know, and you look and people, oh my goodness, look, you can even see a little scar on the nose. And look over here. It's there. This is him just painted in makeup. And that's why it's only the bridge of the nose up. The other ones, we saw the full face. Mm-hmm. Why are we only seeing the eyes up now in this one? Well, I'll tell you why, because it's his father. It's because it's somebody that's going to be recognized. So what does he do? He makes him up as much as best as possible not to be recognized. But what he didn't expect is that there's people behind the scenes now that are ratting him out. And then there was a kid that found the gorilla gloves in the back of his truck and posted a YouTube video on it. And we're out squatching with Todd standing. And then he's like, and then you see him pull off. Well, Todd's over there. We were in the back of his truck, and there was a pair of like gorilla or Sasquatch hands in his truck.
No, the guy you're talking about is a big time YouTuber.
Right. Right.
I believe he's a rapper from Canada, has a huge social media following, is not connected to the Bigfoot world in any way, shape, or form.
No, not at all. And even to back up his story, because he didn't film it, he audio recorded a conversation he had with Todd just to ask him, hey, what's with the gloves in the back? Oh, they're a practical joke for my brother-in-law. And in actuality, what we do know is, and here's a coincidence. The big coincidence is okay, there's Bigfoot gloves in the back. When has Todd ever shown a Bigfoot video with Bigfoot hands in it? Oh, that's right. His Amazon special, his Amazon documentary, Discovering Bigfoot, has the Bigfoot hand grabbing the apple. What a coincidence. And see, as a professional investigator, there are no coincidences in my world. So there you have it with Todd Stanley.
I would just say a Bigfoot researcher who appears to be very passionate about the subject and very pro-proof. I mean, Todd's gone to court over this thing, trying to prove they exist.
Yeah, but you see, here's the thing. Todd based his tried to go. Have you actually read the court documents that Todd went to court with?
Well, of course not. Nobody reads the documents. You know that.
But I have.
That's why you're the Squatch Detective.
And you know what? The number one complaint was that Canada was violating his civil rights.
His civil rights.
Claiming that Bigfoot doesn't exist, because then that violates his civil rights because he believes they exist.
Huh.
And that there's evidence to say they exist. And when asked by the court to provide locations or areas that they do exist in, he refused. So they go, okay, case over with, thrown out of court. We're not even going to judge on this. None.
You would just think that it would not be advantageous of, say, Matt Moneymaker to get caught with a Bigfoot costume in his vehicle.
Correct.
Regardless of the reason.
Right. And I know there was that internet rumor many years ago, but it never fleshed out really.
Now, I would like to reiterate the purpose of this episode was not to go after Todd Standing. It's just the psychology of everything. You know, you and I talked about this.
Well, let me say this to you, Matt, and think about this. Do you see much of a personality difference in a Rick Dyer, a Todd Standing, or a Tom Biscardi?
No, there's not much difference.
Right? Todd is really good at complimenting. Like he gets with Meldrum, but there's my partner Jeff, and I took him, and I. It's always about them. Right? And that's just plain old narcissistic psychology sometimes, is that it's about them. It's not about the creature. You know, he sits there and, I'm Todd Standing, you know, the Bigfoot researcher that takes people out into the woods and sees what? Because I've heard from a few of those people that either told me they got hit on, or that, you know, they say they gave him $3,000 to see him talk about breaks and tree breaks. Oh, look, this is Bigfoot. It's a tree break. Oh, look at this is Bigfoot. This is a tree break. I wonder how much those kids paid, that rapper paid him to take him out. Because you know he didn't do it for free.
Probably not, and probably gained quite a bit of exposure from it, or was at least hoping
trying
so.
to. Yeah. Right. And it didn't go very well for him in that video, obviously. And you know what? Todd never mentions that video, does he? See, Todd is not an attacker, right? He'll make mention, oh, there's haters out there, blah, blah, blah. But Todd is not a brave person, because there's been a lot of reports that there's sock accounts and stuff like that. Dyer will just go out and will lie about you. And that's kind of sociopathic a bit. So when you make up stories about other people to make yourself look good, that's sociopathic. You don't care about, you have no empathy towards the other person at all. You know, it's like, I may be pissed off at so-and-so, but I'm not going to make up a story to make him look like a jerk.
Right.
You know, I'm going to base my stuff on the facts. So you have that whole dynamic. And then the one thing that I noticed, with the other guy, the guy from California, is nothing's ever his fault. And that's his whole thing. Nothing is ever his fault. Whether, whether a rock hits the RV and it's the guy driving fault, not chance. It's got to be somebody's fault, but it's not me. It's this guy or that guy or this guy. And he's very big at belittling people. And if he's trying to get on your good side, he sweet talks you. He sweet talks to you. Then he gets off the phone and he starts calling you names, but you can't hear it. That's the kind of guy I've seen.
So do you think there's a difference between hoaxing and lying?
No, it's essentially the same. It depends on what you mean by lying. I mean, everybody will tell a lie. Some call it white lies.
Right.
Do I look good in that dress? Yes, you do. Because if you say you don't, you're probably going to get a frying pan thrown at you.
Well, in specific, I mean, a different, I guess, hoaxing actual evidence versus making up a claim.
It all falls under the same ilk of dishonesty. And, making up a claim, it's still hoaxing. It's still a hoax. Hey, you tried to tell me you saw a Bigfoot. That's a hoax by definition. So it doesn't matter if there's, you have a piece of physical evidence that's hoaxed, or you're making a claim that's hoaxed. We never had really that differentiation 5 or 10 years ago. You made up a story. You go on the internet and make up a story. Think about it. If that's the case, Ed Smith, Daisy in the Box, that was just a story.
Right.
Making a claim. He never presented any evidence publicly, but that was a hoax. So there is really no difference. I mean, the Mr. Mike saga. Remember that guy that got ambushed by Lamfair about, he's got Bigfoot, and all he was making claims. That was considered a hoax. Truthfully, if you look at things, people call Justin Smeha a hoaxer, and he didn't produce any type of video or film. He had a story, and here's my boots for blood, or here's this piece of steak for blood. That wasn't really manufacturing evidence, at least not your classical type of such. So there is there's a difference, but there's no difference. It's all, the psychology behind it's still the same. It's just with manner. It's like a thief. There's several types of thieves. There's a guy who will go in and wipe out a shelf on a store. There'll be a guy who'll go in and work for somebody and embezzle all kinds of money. And then there's the guy who'll go to a home and say he's going to put your driveway in, take $1,000 from you and leave and never do the driveway. There's different types, but they're all the same thing. In that case, it's theft. In this case, they're hoaxes.
In recent times, over the course of the past several years, trying not to mention any specific names here, Bigfoot shows have become popular. And
they have.
These Bigfoot shows have gone from the area of documentary to more of entertainment documentary. It seems to especially happen in situations where they turn them into a series. You have been part of several TV shows.
I've been in part of several TV documentaries, not shows in particular.
Correct.
Yeah.
Hoaxing on TV. It's something that came up in a show where at least one actual researcher was involved in, and then the show comes out, and then it's exposed for falsifying evidence, I believe. Is that okay? Is that just entertainment, or should the parties involved in the show be held accountable?
I think there should be an explanation. I'll give you an example. Sometimes editors can throw in evidence that you don't know is going to be thrown in on. You got to understand that there is a multi-layer. When you're talent, you sign a contract, you got to do what you got to do. Otherwise, guess what? You're in breach and you're going to get sued for big money. And these people have attorneys, and they got a pretty good budget for their attorneys and their legal department. So once you sign that contract, you're kind of on the dotted line of what they're going to, you got to make sure they're, that things are going to change, or, you walk away once your contract is up and then say, hey, you know what? This is bullshit. So sometimes you don't know if it's that, but there's some stuff that's like, you know what? I'm not doing it. And I've been on shows where I've been asked to say things, but I said, no, that's not really a true statement. And, I've worked with a lot of great directors, Mike Wafer being one of them, who did my Monster Quest into the truth behind the Loch Ness Monster. Then he would turn around right away and say, well, how would you say it that would be truthful? Go right ahead. So he would let me change what what he wanted me to say. It's not truthful, which I respected. He was very respectful of my wish to be truthful. So, it all depends on the extent. Like, I'll give you a great example. The Finding Bigfoot, with the audio. And they did not know the audio was going to be thrown in there by the editor. That was done in post-production. So how can really they be held accountable for it? Well, they almost walked off the show because of it.
Right.
There was almost not a season 2 because of it. Okay, that's ethical. That's okay. Hey, listen, we're not going to do this. If you're going to put fake stuff in there, there was that thermal of the horse or the cow or whatever it was, and they kind of planned, they were pissed off about that. So that's why you see a little bit of different attitude going forward in episodes or seasons 2 and forward. Now, yes, is there a lot of post-production and, some spiking of getting people to stay on after the commercial break? That happens in every show, including documentaries I've done. That's done and ending, but there's nothing necessarily dishonest about that until you get to the actual segment. Now, when somebody goes into a mine that hundreds of people have gone into as a tourist, and then they're on the radio, hey, there may be cinnabar in there. We better get out of there. When they all know there's not, well, that's kind of, that's not proper.
Right.
And to me, I have issues with that. But then again, I haven't seen the second season of that show. But I heard it's not, I'm not going to speak on what I've heard. That'd be hearsay. Mm-hmm. But I know the first season, if that crap went on, I wouldn't have signed for the second season if that crap went on. And then I would have came out and said, hey, guess what? Now that the season's out, I'm no longer under the NDA. This is the story behind that story. And I would have just laid it all out there. But sometimes people are influenced by a lot of things, money being the number one, target. And I've always said, I will never make, in fact, I've done, 12, going on my 13th now, program to be shot on, to air, and that'll be Finding J2, which will be sometime next year on Amazon Prime. I've never been paid for an appearance on a Bigfoot show.
Really?
Never took money from anybody. I've always done that on my own dime. The only money I ever took, and I was offered it because, and they said, listen, we're going to pay you for this because we're going to take you out of the country for 9 days, and we need you there for 9 days. So you're going to be spending, between travel and everything, and your rest after travel, you're probably going to be out for 12 days. So we're going to pay you for that. And that's the only money. And they paid for my passport. They paid for everything. In fact, they wouldn't even let me buy cigarettes there. They bought them for me because that came out of the production budget. Literally, we went into the Loch Ness Museum and I wanted this book, and they said, oh, nope. Production buys that for you. You want something? Production buys that for you. So literally I was given, $1,000 to do the program. And they gave me another couple $100 spending money when I went back to London to hang out. They gave me like a couple $100 to spend for the night while I was in London. So
how many pints does that buy?
Not much, not really that much, because I literally got there and I was like, okay, got settled in my room, went down to the restaurant dinner, said, you know what, I want fish and chips. I'm in friggin' London. And I had that. I had a couple of pints and I went to bed and came
God
home.
Save the Queen, I'm out.
Yeah, God save the Queen, I'm out. And I went home with some dough in my pocket too. But no, I've never been paid for any of this. There's never been a money motivation to be on television or to do any of these shows. They never said, I don't know how many conferences I've gone to and spoken at where I haven't been paid for. And sometimes I go there, not expecting to get paid, and they were event organizer will slip me an envelope. Not expected, never settled on a price. They didn't have to pay me anything. Sometimes they'll slip me gas money, or they'll slip me, some money for lodging or whatever, or food. But for the most part, I've done a lot of that stuff for free, and people are yelling at me while you're speaking, and people are making money. You should make money, and you speak. If people are coming to see you as part, you should. But there's still a lot of upstart conferences and stuff like that I'll do for free to help them.
What advice would you give if somebody's swimming through all this material, trying to discern what's the truth? What should people look for whenever it comes to hoaxing or not hoaxing?
So, number one is when it comes to video evidence, is it just a 3 to 5 second, 10-second clip of a Bigfoot with no story in front of it and no story behind it? That should be an automatic flag right there. That should be the big red circle, right? If you can't see two arms in the picture, if you can't see 2 arms, 2 feet, 2 legs, and a head, it's probably not a Bigfoot. Probably not. Not always. And again, there should be a story behind it. What kind of equipment was used? All these things that should be answered. It's okay to look at it and have some open-minded thought about it. Mm. But unless you're going to investigate it, don't put your stamp of approval on it. Or unless somebody investigates it and says, hey, this is what we found out, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Now you can put your stamp. But there's a lot of organizations out there, or quote-unquote organizations out there, that will put their stamp of approval and act like there was some big investigation to put it out there and for their following or their YouTube clicks or stuff like that.
Yeah, that's something that I've noticed here recently, especially a group putting out quite a bit of material that's just either known to be a hoax and already proven a hoax, or is definitely suspect, and they're just not.
They don't care.
They don't care.
Right. They don't care. They're just worried about how many views they get a day. Now, I got to tell you, as a podcaster, and I moved to YouTube back in 2019 with the advent. Blog Talk was wonderful when we were there, but it kind of outlived. It's kind of aged now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, now we're doing the video thing, and we talk about pictures. We can show the audience the pictures, and we can show a video where we can let people listen to the audio. We could do that with radio, but the quality is so much better now. The only downside is we don't take live callers, which kind of pluses and minuses of its own. I don't know how many times people called me and said they had a UFO in their pants, but am I worried? Am I concerned about building a channel? Hell yeah. Would I like to make some money off the channel? Hell yeah. And right now, I'm glad to say the channel is paying for the streaming service I'm using. So that is one big plus. That's something that Blog Talk promised us and never came across with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, YouTube has been very good to me. It's paying for the streaming service, which means, I'm getting the word out, the truth out, and I don't do any, you won't ever find anything dishonest. What I say on my channel, I believe to be the truth. And if I don't know, I'll say, I don't know. I'm kind of skeptical, and this is my opinion. I say fact is fact and opinion as opinion. That's the mantra. And that's the real big thing about integrity in podcasting. You know, you put the truth out there, and, I'm not going to be a show that's going to have, 5,000 very well scripted people come on the show and read their encounters and not bother to ask a question, because that sounds a little bit disingenuous to me. Unless you're just saying, hey, we're going to just present this story and this is it. Here it is. Take a listen to it.
I think there's a place for that.
Right.
But if you're putting yourself out there as an active field investigator or researcher and you're doing that sort of thing, I would agree.
But my concern is that there may be certain networks out there that are just making up stories and putting them out there as real. Yeah. And then you have people coming to us saying, hey, well, what about this guy saw this and this guy saw that? What's real and what's not now? It's become a hayfield of hoaxing. There is one show that does disclaim at the beginning, hey, these are embellished stories from actual case files. Well, are they or not? I don't know if they're actual case files or not, but at least he's saying that these are embellished stories. These are stories.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so many out that will say, oh, yes, the Bigfoot attack. We lived in a cabin for 10 years and Bigfoot kept attacking us. And then you'll have this, guy come on, well, yeah, and it may be true. It may not be true, but we never know because they're not vetted. They're not investigated. They're just a show to have somebody come out and talk about it. And to me, that does a bit of disservice unless there's some sort of disclaimer. This is for entertainment purposes only.
Well, there was a lot of people that thought Mountain Monsters was an actual Bigfoot research show.
Sure. Sure. And, the people like me, this is not real. And then I met the guys and, it's just, it was a TV show for crying out loud. But, one of the guys actually did have a Bigfoot experience when he was young.
I've heard nothing but good things about the cast members from Bigfooters that have met them and hung out with them.
Yeah, they are good. And you know what? They do know their shit in the woods. That's the amazing thing. And God rest his soul, I met Trapper back in 2016. And I had taken a thermal video in Pennsylvania. Maybe it was 20. I forget what year it was, actually. Now I'm thinking about it. Coconut gets all these years mixed up now. But, so here it was, and I video, and it was only on my phone, so we're really having trouble seeing it. I'm like, I think it's a bear, but it could be a bear, but, because it stood up a couple of times and looked at us. And we could hear it. We couldn't, we were all we were all lights out, and we hear this thing, shh, shh, and I get the thermal out, and there it is, standing up, looking at us. Like, and it's all solid color. And then, it kind of, I'm trying to adjust and it's getting down. And I'm like, your eyes aren't on the screen completely. You're looking around too. And next thing you know, it's standing up again, looking at us like, what's it doing? Is it hiding behind that bush and keep looking over at us? And then it kind of like, did it crawl away? What the hell was that? So we look at it with Trapper, and Trapper says, that's a bear. You know, and that's a bear. And sure enough, I get on the big screen and you can see the undulation of the back, you know, the hind legs. So yeah, that's definitely a bear. But he saw that off that smartphone, that little screen. He said, yeah, that's a bear. You know, so those guys know their shit, and they're not wackadoos that, oh, that's a Bigfoot. You know, no, they're nothing like that. They're, and you know what? They are so good to their fans, and they're so good to the kids, and they'll spend time with you. They'll, you know, Wild Bill come up, and every time he sees me, some bitch punches me in the arm. Hey, what's going on, Steve? You know, and, you know, I felt bad when Trapper died. He was a real good guy because, you know, at the time, there was a friend of mine who was a big fan of his, and his thing, he turns around, he goes, he's not here? Yeah, where you trying to get this autograph from? He goes, well, let's get him on the phone. And he called them. I mean, that's the kind of guys they were. You're like, oh, let's get them on the phone. And they're not looking for money. They're just enjoying. They're just enjoying making people happy. You can see that.
Yeah.
And that's what you know, and it's kind of funny because when I go to these conferences, you know, a lot of times people treat me like I'm a celebrity because they see me on this show or that show or this show. And I'm just a dude. You know that. You've known me long enough. And I get so humbled sometimes. Sometimes I get embarrassed because I do have some, you know, fan folks out there that are like really like, oh, you know, and I'm like, oh, I'm just a guy, really. I'm not, you know, and, you know, they want pictures and they want to spend some time with me and talk to me and ask questions and stuff like that. And it's my honor, really, my honor to do that for them, to make their day. You know, I could care less about a book sale or anything like that. And, you know, I'm forever giving stuff out for free at my table. Here, take a couple of wristbands. Here, you know, the books I got it, you know, because I pay for the books. But, you know, some of the other stuff I get so a low price or whatever. I'm here, take some stuff. You know, here, have an autographed picture. You know, it makes your day wonderful. You know, and I don't ask for anything for that. It's because it makes me feel good to make their day, paying it forward. You know, and I feel that's a lot of guys do this. I mean, Cliff Barrickman, you know, I've seen him do such kind things, Lyle Blackburn, and you know, it's really cool to see.
After it's all said and done, what do you hope your legacy is? What do you want to be known for or remembered as?
That's a damn good question. And maybe in 1998, I would have said, "Oh, the guy who brought the evidence out to prove Bigfoot exists." But today, yeah, that's what every green Bigfooter wants to believe, that they're going to change the world. But getting into it, I had some foresight of that because, you know, that as a, you know, brand new crispy investigator 10 years earlier, I had the same oh, I'm going to be, and then you realize, okay, settle down. So I knew kind of getting into it, I'd like to do it, but that was always my impression. But my legacy is just bringing some honesty to the research field, some exposure of what's real and what's not to the Bigfoot field, bringing forth some good ideas like using primate behavior to kind of assist your search, and further some of the possible hypotheses of the creature, and putting a smile on people's faces once in a while, because if anybody knows my channel, I like making people laugh every once in a while. Unfortunately, it may hurt a few people's feelings, but I'm kind of feeding off the ridiculousness of certain things. And it's never meant really to harm anybody. It's just meant to have a little laugh and make people see it's kind of ridiculous that, you know, what they're saying over there when you think about it. And, you know, if I'm known as the guy that kind of puts an honest spin on things, then I've done my job. And one other thing. When I'm gone, I want my legacy to be also, boy, I sure wish Steve was around so we could figure out what the hell this is or not. That would be my ultimate legacy.
Steve Kulls, the Squatch Detective. Thank you, my friend, for joining me and allowing me to barrage you with these questions.
Anytime, my brother, anytime.
It's been an absolute blast. Tell the people, all the good people listening out there, where they can find you and when and all that good stuff.
Sure. Well, we air Squatch DTV live 9 p.m. Sundays, 9 p.m. Eastern Sunday nights at squatchdtv.com, which goes directly to the YouTube channel. I made it really easy, squatchdtv.com. And you can always visit the website at squatchdetective.com, where we have the Hall of Shame. We have Squatch D University, which has a ton of resources if you're into the Bigfoot research thing. And we have some audio files of known animal audios too. So if you have some questions on what you're hearing out there, you can play what a raccoon sounds like. You can play what a fox scream sounds like. Stuff like that. And a lot of educational stuff on there. Swing by, give us a hello.
And a shout out to your partner, Chris. What a ride or die has he been for you, man?
I'll tell you what, Chris Bennett is one of my best friends in the world. I love the guy up and down, and he's been there for me through thick and thin, always had my back. And, I had a scare with him a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
When he had a heart attack, and his sister called me. And my God, a couple of years earlier, I lost my brother to a heart attack. And I was like, oh my God, not again. I can't go through this again. Right? Not now. And it was a rough period of time, but we're through it. And here we are.
All these years later, still together.
Yep. He's been my co-host officially since 2010. So here we are 11 years later out of 13, 14 years.
I've seen a lot of podcast partnerships come and go in that time.
Yeah. The first, 4 years, there was a lot of podcast partners that went on and went. But there was one person that always stayed. That was me. And there was always a person that when he took that chair up, he wasn't going anywhere. That was Chris Bennett.
Thanks again. Thanks everyone for listening and subscribing and showing your support. Keep an open mind and open eyes. Thanks for listening to Bigfoot Crossroads.